My daughter-in-law moved out. She took my son's retirement with her. Not metaphorically, literally. 41 years of his contributions to a joint investment account they'd opened together in 2003 transferred to a personal account in her name on a Tuesday afternoon, while my son Marcus was sitting next to me in a cardiac ICU waiting room, watching a monitor that measured whether his father's heart was still worth fighting for. I didn't know any of this yet. I was focused on the sound of the waiting room television, which nobody was watching, cycling through a home improvement show about people flipping houses in Phoenix. I remember thinking how strange it was that a television could just keep talking while the world was ending. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I spent 38 years a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio, and I thought I understood betrayal as an academic concept. I taught students about it. Benedict Arnold, Julius Caesar, the Treaty of Paris. I used to tell my kids, my students, that betrayal always follows the same pattern. Someone is trusted, someone is given access, someone uses that access when the door is open and nobody is looking. I just never expected to be the one who opened the door. It started the way most things that ruin your life start. Quietly, unremarkably, with a Tuesday. I'd had a heart attack 4 weeks earlier. A moderate one, my cardiologist said, as if there were degrees of acceptable. It happened at the grocery store. I was standing in the cereal aisle trying to decide between two kinds of oatmeal, and then I was on the floor looking up at fluorescent lights and a teenage stock boy who kept saying, "Sir, sir, can you hear me, sir?" I could hear him fine. I just couldn't answer. They kept me for 5 days. After I came home, my son Marcus and his wife Sandra insisted I not be alone. This made sense to me. My wife Ruth passed 4 years ago, and the house we'd shared for 31 years was just mine now, which is a different thing than being yours together. Marcus and Sandra lived 40 minutes away in Westerville. They had a daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who was 9 years old and had recently become very interested in birds. She would text me photographs of birds she saw outside their kitchen window and demand I identify them. I did not always know what kind of bird they were. I would look them up. This was our relationship, and I valued it more than I could ever explain to anyone who hasn't spent 3 years learning to eat dinner alone. During those weeks after my heart attack, Marcus came over almost every evening. Sometimes Sandra came with him, sometimes she didn't. I noticed this the way you notice small weather changes, a degree or two, not enough to reach for a jacket, but enough that something in you registers the shift. Marcus would bring food in containers his wife had packed sometimes, and other times he'd bring takeout, and I could tell the difference not just from the packaging, but from the way he explained it. When it was Sandra's cooking, he'd mention her by name. When it was takeout, he'd just say, "I grabbed food," a small thing. I filed it away the way old teachers file things, without meaning to. The night before I went back to the hospital, not for me, as it turned out, Marcus sat at my kitchen table and told me things were difficult at home. That was the word he used. Difficult. He was 58 years old and looked like his mother around the eyes, and he was using the word difficult the way people use it when they mean something much sharper. I asked if he and Sandra were all right. He said, "Dad, I honestly don't know." I told him whatever it was, it could be worked through. I told him Ruth and I had gone through difficult years and come out the other side. He nodded in the way children nod at their parents when they don't want to contradict them. I recognized it. I used to do it myself. He left around 9. I watched the news. I went to bed. At 2:17 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice was different. Compressed somehow, he said, "Dad, I need you to stay calm." I sat up in the dark. "I'm at Riverside," he said. "That's Riverside Methodist Hospital, 4 miles from my house. I came home tonight and she was gone. Sandra was gone. Lily was at her friend Emma's for the night, thank God, and I walked in, and the bedroom closet was half empty, and her car was gone, and I found—" He stopped. I could hear him breathing. "I found a note," he said. "She left a note on the counter." I waited. "She said she's been seeing someone for about 2 years. She said she's going to Las Vegas with him. She said she's not coming back." His voice didn't break the way I expected it to. It stayed very even, very controlled. That frightened me more than crying would have. "Dad, she also said she transferred money from the investment account. She did it last week, apparently, moved it to an account in her name." I said, How much? He was quiet for a second. All of it. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember pulling into the hospital parking lot and it being colder than I expected for April, a thin, mean wind coming off the river. I found Marcus in a waiting room on the second floor. He was sitting very straight in a plastic chair, still in his work clothes. He was holding his phone but not looking at it. I sat down next to him. She transferred it on a Wednesday, he said, without looking up. Last Wednesday, he said without looking up. Last Wednesday, while I was at work. 41 years, Dad. I started contributing to that account when I was 27 years old. I knew what was in that account. Marcus had told me once, in the way adult children occasionally tell their parents about their finances to offer reassurance that they're going to be all right. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that represented 41 years of discipline and sacrifice, and choosing not to buy things because the future mattered. Why are you at the hospital? I asked him. He looked at me then. His eyes were dry, which was worse. Because when I found the note, he said, I sat down on the kitchen floor and I couldn't get up. My chest was tight. I thought, with your history, with Mom's history, I thought I should be careful. They ran the tests. His heart was fine. The cardiologist told us around 5 in the morning. Stress response. Anxiety, understandable given the circumstances. They wanted to observe him a few more hours. I went and got us both bad coffee from the vending machine down the hall. I sat back down in the plastic chair. The ceiling lights in that waiting room had a faint flicker you could only notice if you weren't trying to. My phone buzzed, a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Gerald, this is Sandra. I know Marcus is probably telling you his version of things. There's more to this story. I hope someday you'll be willing to hear my side. I never wanted to hurt you. I read it twice. I put my phone in my pocket. I didn't answer. The next few days operated on a different kind of logic than regular days. Lily had to be told. That was the thing I kept coming back to. 9 years old and watching birds out the kitchen window and texting her grandfather photographs to identify, and someone was going to have to explain to her why her mother wasn't home. Marcus asked if I'd be there when he told her. I said, of course. We sat at their kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had sat the night before telling me things were difficult, and he was careful and honest with her in the way the best parents are. He told her that Mom had made a choice to go away for a while, that it wasn't Lily's fault, that both her parents loved her. Lily listened. She was very still. Then she said, is she coming back? Marcus looked at me for just a second. I looked at the table. He told her the truth, that he didn't know yet, but they would figure it out together, just the two of them, and she wasn't going to be alone in any of this. Lily nodded. She looked out the kitchen window. After a long pause, she said, there's a white-throated sparrow. You can tell by the yellow stripe above the eye. Neither of us said anything. We both just looked at the sparrow. I drove home an hour later and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. Marcus retained an attorney within the week, a woman named Patricia who came recommended by a colleague of his and who turned out to be exactly the kind of person you want when your world has been disassembled. She explained the situation with the clarity of someone who has delivered this information many times before and still treats each case as if it's the first. What Sandra had done was not technically theft, Patricia explained, because the account was jointly owned. Both names were on it. This is the legal reality of joint investment accounts. Each owner has full access, full withdrawal rights, and there is no requirement for consent from the other party. It is also, Patricia told them, precisely why matrimonial financial law exists. The question was not whether Sandra had the legal access. The question was what the courts would say about it in the context of a divorce. The answer, Patricia believed, was that they would say quite a lot. Dissipation of marital assets is the legal term. When one spouse liquidates or transfers shared property in anticipation of divorce proceedings, particularly when done unilaterally and covertly, courts tend to view this with considerable disfavor. Sandra had moved the money 9 days before leaving the note. She had consulted no one. She had given no notice. In Ohio, marital property acquired during the marriage, which this account clearly was, is subject to equitable distribution. The fact that she'd moved it didn't make it hers. Patricia filed for a temporary restraining order to freeze the account she'd moved the funds into. The judge granted it. Sandra called Marcus the following day. he answered, against Patricia's specific advice, because he said he couldn't not. 31 years of a life with someone. You can know intellectually that the conversation serves no purpose and still find yourself picking up the phone. She told him she hadn't wanted it to happen this way. She told him she'd been unhappy for a long time. She told him the man she'd gone to Las Vegas with, his name was Derek, someone she'd met at a conference 3 years ago, understood her in ways Marcus hadn't for years. She said she knew this was painful. She said she hoped someday he would understand. He told her to go through Patricia. Then he hung up and called me. I was in my backyard when he called. I'd been trying to do something useful, which mostly meant pulling dead stalks from the garden beds Ruth used to maintain, trying to remember which plants were perennials and would come back. I'd gotten it wrong every year since she died. I listened to him go through the conversation. He wasn't asking for advice. He was doing what grieving people do, which is narrate the experience out loud so it becomes real in a different way. When he was done, I told him he'd done the right thing. He said, she sounded like herself. That's the strange part. She sounded completely like herself. I told him I knew. That's often how it goes. People don't become unrecognizable when they hurt you. That's the part nobody prepares you for. He was quiet for a moment. Did you ever think about leaving? He asked. After Mom got sick. Did you ever? No, I said. It came out before I'd even thought about it. But it was true. Not even close. Not for a single day. He didn't say anything to that. But I heard his breathing change slightly. Get some sleep, I said. Let Patricia handle it. I want to tell you about Lily, because I think that's the part people need to understand. In the weeks that followed, Marcus restructured their life as best he could. He worked from home 2 days a week. He arranged his schedule around school pickup. His company was understanding. He'd been there long enough that they had reason to be. The practical scaffolding of single-parent life got constructed piece by piece, the way those things always do. But Lily had her own kind of processing to do. She started coming to my house on Saturday mornings. This wasn't something we formally arranged. It just started happening. Marcus would drop her off with the vague sense that she wanted to be with me and that I would be good for her, or possibly that she would be good for me, and probably both. We would eat breakfast. Eggs usually. She liked them scrambled with cheese and she liked toast cut on the diagonal, which I learned after cutting it straight the first time and being gently corrected. Then we would go outside and look for birds. She knew a great deal about birds, more than I would have expected from a 9-year-old. She could identify sparrows by their crown patterns and finches by their bills, and she knew that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at Cornell University was the leading research institution for ornithology in North America, and she pronounced ornithology perfectly. One morning in May, about 6 weeks after Sandra had left, we were sitting on my back porch watching a pair of mourning doves on the fence, when Lily said, without preamble, "Grandpa, do you think Mom misses me?" I turned to look at her. She was watching the doves. I took my time answering, because she deserved a real answer, not a comfortable one. I think I said that loving someone and making good choices are two different things, and sometimes people get them very tangled up. She considered this. The doves shifted on the fence. "Do you miss Grandma?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "Do you think she misses you?" I thought about Ruth, the way she folded newspaper crossword puzzles in half before starting them. The argument we had for 11 years about whether the thermostat should be set at 68 or 70. The way she used to put her hand on my back in crowded rooms without saying anything. "I hope so," I said. Lily leaned her head against my arm. We watched the doves for a while. She said, "I'm glad you're not gone." I didn't say anything to that. I put my arm around her. Sandra reached out to me a second time in early June. This time it was a voicemail. She had clearly thought about what she wanted to say. Her voice was composed, prepared, the way voices get when someone has rehearsed. She told me she knew I probably thought badly of her. She said she understood that. She said she'd made choices she knew would hurt people, but that she'd been in a place of desperation she didn't know how to explain. She said she hoped I would remember the years she'd been part of our family, the holidays, Lily's childhood, the way she'd been there when Ruth was sick. That last part? I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after the message ended. Sandra had been there when Ruth was sick. She had brought food and driven to appointments and sat in waiting rooms not unlike the one where Marcus and I had sat together in April. That was true. I didn't want to erase it, and I won't. People are not just the worst thing they've ever done. But she had also left her daughter's father alone with a note on a Tuesday while the man's father was still recovering from a heart attack. She had moved their life savings in secret. She had made her choices and left everyone else to deal with the aftermath. I didn't call her back. Marcus asked me about it later. He'd somehow found out she'd contacted me. Sandra had told him, apparently, perhaps hoping it would soften something. I told him she'd reached out, that I'd listened, and that I hadn't responded. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from when he was about 12 years old and had just understood something about how the world actually worked. Was there anything worth hearing? He asked. There usually is, I said. That's not the same thing as it changing anything. The divorce was finalized 7 months after Sandra left. Patricia was as good as advertised. The court agreed that the transfer of the investment account had constituted dissipation of marital assets. Sandra was required to return 83% of the funds. There were deductions made for various things: attorney's fees, costs attributed to the proceedings she'd initiated through her own representation. Marcus didn't get back every dollar, but he got back enough to rebuild from. Derek, the man Sandra had gone to Las Vegas with, turned out to have his own complicated situation, which I won't detail here because I only know pieces of it, and I'm not interested in being unfair to anyone. What I can tell you is that by September, Sandra was no longer in Las Vegas. She had moved to Phoenix, which struck me as slightly absurd given the home improvement show cycling through the hospital waiting room the night Marcus and I had sat there, as if the universe has a sense of irony. She asked about Lily, through Patricia, through the proper channels. She asked about visitation. The court granted her supervised visitation, pending a review of the circumstances. Lily was informed. She had now, at 9 years old, the kind of sophisticated understanding of legal process that most adults never develop. One Saturday morning that fall, she came over and I had made the eggs and the diagonal toast. And she sat across from me and looked like she was working on something. She said, "Emma's mom says what mom did was unforgivable. But my teacher, Mr. Neptizo, Holloway, says that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for the other person." I told her that was probably the wisest thing any teacher had ever said. She thought about that. She put her fork down. "I don't know if I'm there yet," she said. I told her she didn't need to be, that 9 years old was not a deadline for anything. She picked her fork back up. "I want to be honest with you about something, because I think these things only mean anything when they're honest. There were days that fall when I was very angry, not just for Marcus, but selfishly for myself. Sandra had been in our life for over 30 years. She'd been there for things that couldn't be undone or replaced. Ruth's last birthday. Lily's first steps. The kind of accumulated ordinary time that you only recognize as precious after it's rearranged without your consent. I had trusted her the way you trust someone who has been at your table long enough that you stop thinking about the trust and just live in it. And she had used that trust as a kind of cover. Not deliberately, I think, not maliciously toward me specifically, but the way all betrayals use the existing structure of love as their operating infrastructure. I thought about my students and Benedict Arnold a lot that fall, but I also thought about this. The thing that held was Marcus. The thing that held was Lily identifying birds by their crown patterns and knowing how to pronounce ornithology. The thing that held was the fact that on a Tuesday morning when everything was going wrong, my son had called me first, and I had answered, and we had sat in a hospital waiting room together, and it had been enough. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to not be alone in it. Ruth and I raised a person who, when the door falls off its hinges, does not stand in the opening shouting. He finds the hardware, he measures the frame, he does the work. I am more proud of that than of almost anything else I can think of. Last month, Lily sent me a photograph. She'd upgraded from texting to using a proper birding app, which allows her to add annotations. The photograph was of a great blue heron standing in what appeared to be a drainage ditch near their house. Her annotation read, "Great blue heron, usually solitary, very patient, can stand still for a very long time waiting for the right moment, does not rush." She added one more line at the bottom. "This one reminds me of you, Grandpa." I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I saved it to my camera roll, and I put my phone down on the kitchen table where Ruth's crossword puzzles used to be, and I looked out the window at the garden, and I noticed for the first time that the cornflowers had come back on their own. I hadn't even planted them this year. They just came back. That happens with perennials. You don't always have to do anything. Sometimes they just know to return. I've been thinking about what actually happened here. Not the legal version, not the timeline Patricia outlined in her filings, but the real sequence of causes and effects, the way one choice builds on another until the structure either holds or it doesn't. Sandra made a decision, a series of them actually, over what turned out to be 3 years. Each one required the next. The secrecy required the deception. The deception required the withdrawal. The withdrawal required the note, and the note required all of us, Marcus, Lily, me, to decide what we were going to do with what was left. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell these kinds of stories. The focus goes to the person who left, the person who took the money, the person who made the dramatic choice. But the actual weight of the story lives in what happens to the people who stay, what they do in the aftermath. Whether they let the damage define the new shape of their lives, or whether they pick up the frame and rebuild inside it. Marcus could have collapsed. I watched him very carefully in those first weeks, the way you watch someone after a fall to see if anything is broken. He didn't collapse. He called an attorney. He told his daughter the truth in language she could carry. He went to work. He made eggs in the morning. These sound like small things. They are not small things. They are what integrity looks like when it isn't performing for anyone. When there's no audience and no reward, and you just keep doing the next right thing because it's the next right thing. Lily is 9 years old, and she already understands something that takes most people decades to figure out, which is that the people who leave aren't always the ones to blame for everything, and the people who stay aren't automatically the heroes, but that how you conduct yourself in the middle of someone else's bad decision says more about your actual character than anything you'd ever choose to say about yourself. I think about the cornflowers that came back in my garden. I didn't plant them. I didn't tend them. They just returned on their own because that's what they were built to do. I've decided that's what I want to believe about people too, that underneath the damage, underneath the specific terrible Tuesday when everything changed, there is something in us that is built to return, to grow back toward whatever light is available. What I know for certain is this: the choice to stay present, to stay honest, to stay useful to the people who need you. That choice has consequences just as real as the choice to leave. Marcus chose to stay. He chose to be there for Lily every morning. He chose to let the law handle what the law was designed to handle and not spend himself trying to punish someone who was already gone. And I chose to answer the phone at 2 in the morning. That's all I did. I got dressed in the dark and drove to the hospital and sat in a plastic chair and drank bad coffee, and I was there. Sometimes that is the whole of what's required. Not brilliance, not strategy. Just presence, just showing up and refusing to disappear. The cornflowers came back. Marcus is rebuilding. Lily knows the difference between a white-throated sparrow and a house sparrow, and she is not done yet, not even close. Neither am I.